The Atlanta Braves have lost a lot of veteran talent over the last few off seasons. Should they have been willing to do a bad deal to keep any of those guys? Let's talk about it. Yes, welcome on in to Braves Today for Tuesday, January 7th, your source of news, notes, and updates on your Atlanta Braves. I'm your host, Lindsay Crosby. You can follow me on Twitter and Blue Sky at Crosby Baseball. You can follow the show on Twitter, Braves_today. We have a Facebook page and Instagram as well, and you can find all of my written work, bravestoday.com. That's the Braves Today Substack, as this is both a podcast and a newsletter. And there's a lot of ways to reach out to us, right? Obviously, all of those methods there. We have an email address, contact@bravestoday.com. And while I was out last week for the holidays, Justin sent me a great email that was the genesis of this show today. And I'm not going to read you the entire email, even though there were some great, kind words in there from Justin about how much he appreciates the pod, especially in the wake of David O'Brien deciding to just give up on their podcast. But he did also ask a really good question. And to paraphrase here, in the Braves win now window, because you are in the middle of a World Series window. He is completely correct. You are in a World Series window right now. Is there an offseason you would suggest is the time to throw caution to the wind and go all in on a free agent? Like with Acuna, Riley, Olsen, all the rest of these guys that are extended long-term, is there a point where, even if it means taking on dead money in the back end of the deal, it's worth going and signing a free agent to a market rate contract to push this team over the edge? And he continues, it feels like our system is trying to lock down as many above average to top 5 talents as we can and compete on the margins, right? Rather than going out and getting the top tier free agents, going into that second wave of free agency, that second tier of free agents, and trying to grab guys out of there to supplement the core we have. Is it worth it to be willing to take on a big dead money deal, or a deal that would have dead money at the end, to push this core over the top? So I want to talk about that, and it's going to be a little bit of a different show. We're not going to do a bunch of quotes or clips, not a bunch of stats and things like that. We're going to talk about the team's philosophy on building a roster, because I do think Justin's right on point with this. What Atlanta has done, what Alex Anthopoulos has done, is locked up as many above average to top 5 players at as many positions as he can to deals that are towards the bottom end of what a player at that caliber would receive, right? I think we can all agree if Austin Riley were to go to free agency, he would get more than what he is making. That is 100%. We all can agree on something like that. Austin Riley's extension, when he signed it, was 10 years, $212 million. So $21.2 million a year. If Austin Riley went to free agency right now at the age of 28, because this 2025 would be his final ARB year before he hit free agency. He would hit free agency in 26. He would make more than 10 years and $21.2 million. He would make more than $21.2 million a year. He absolutely would. Let's talk about that. Because, and I understand that the cold open that I gave, where I talked about the Braves have lost a lot of veteran leadership, isn't necessarily what Justin was asking. But I do think those two things are connected. Because you have lost a lot of your leadership, a lot of your veterans over the last 3 or 4 years. And conversely, at the same time, you've done a good job of bringing in new faces, new people to be leaders in the clubhouse. But it's important to point out, after every single season of the last 4, because again, I like to look at these 3, 4, 5 year windows And it's good to just ignore 2020 because it was so weird, right? So from 2021 through 2024, after every season, you've lost either important veterans, important chemistry guys, or top tier veteran leaders. And you can go back and you can look at this. After 2021, Freddie Freeman, that's the big one right there. You lost Freddie Freeman. And you heard Dansby at the celebratory pep rally in Truist Park after the World Series re-sign Freddie. You heard him say it on stage, and it didn't happen, not for lack of trying. We'll get to that a little bit later in the show. After 2022, you lost Dansby Swanson. Dansby Swanson left to go to the Chicago Cubs. It ended up being a good thing for him. He got a financial deal, like unlike Freddie, where the money was roughly equivalent when you factor in the deferrals and the state taxes in California. Freddie was choosing to leave Atlanta, all things being equal. Dansby got so much more money from the Cubs than Atlanta was offering him. Like, I don't begrudge him at all for taking that deal. I'd have done it too. No hard feelings towards Dansby Swanson, buddy, because you got a bag. You deserved it. That's great. You also lost a glue guy in Guillermo Heredia. And I love Heredia. He's been in the KBO the last few years. He's making a couple $1,000,000 to bat over 300 with double-digit homers. He's living his best life, and I love it for him. But, yeah, I love it for him. But you did lose, so you lost a veteran leader, a top-tier veteran leader in Dansby Swanson, and you lost one of those glue guys in Guillermo Heredia. 2023 wasn't as damaging from that top-tier veteran leadership standpoint. But you did still lose veterans and some different leaders, right? Eddie Rosario had been here, obviously, for a couple years after being traded in 2021. You let him walk. Kirby Yates, you did not pick up that option. In retrospect, maybe you should have picked up that option for Kirby Yates. He had a fantastic year in Texas last year. It was one of the better relievers in baseball, making, I believe, just under what you would have paid him on that option. Again, in retrospect, would have been nice to have him. I don't know if he would have had a chance to do as much as he did if he was here and you had all these other guys. But in retrospect, sucked to lose Kirby Yates. But you didn't, after 23, you didn't have the same caliber of top-tier veteran leaders leaving, but 2024 made up for that, right? After this most recent season, it hit both your pitching staff and your position player group, right? You lost Travis d'Arnaud, did not pick up his option. He signed with the Angels. He's the guy that led the meetings with the pitchers and the catchers. Travis d'Arnaud led those meetings. Like, Sal Fasano had a big part. Sean Murphy had a big part. Travis d'Arnaud led those meetings. He was the de facto leader of the clubhouse last season. So, Travis d'Arnaud, you lost him. You also lost Max Fried and Charlie Morton, right? Max Fried was one of the longer tenured Braves. I believe he debuted soon after Ozzie Albies. So, one of the longest tenured Braves out the door. Charlie Morton, obviously second stint with the team, upper 30s when you signed him, left after his age 40, 41 season. But we talked about this on yesterday's show. A significant leader that everybody really looked up to. Everybody was comfortable going to him with questions, with concerns. They needed help, whether it was media members, whether it was players, staff, like whatever. Charlie Morton was that dude. He was the father figure for everybody. Bullpen, you also lost some continuity and some leadership with Jesse Chavez and AJ Minter. AJ Minter, again, one of the longer tenured Braves. I want to say he played 7 seasons. So, he debuted pretty early. Jesse Chavez, been around the game, has played for just about every single team and just about every single role you could possibly imagine. So, another situation where you made up for not losing as much after 23 with what you lost after 24. And so now the question you have is going into 2025, because so far, for the most part, you've been able to have other guys step up to replace some of these departed leaders. Going into 2025, if you're having to try to pinpoint 3 or 4 leaders on, I'm going to say each side of the ball. I'm going to use a football term here, each side of the ball, but position player group, pitching group. Position players, you look at Marcell Ozuna has been a leader to a lot of the Latin American players. If you're ever out watching batting practice, whether it's from the stands or that MVP thing, media, we get to be on the warning track, like on the dirt but back there behind, like from dugout to dugout, so we can watch. Marcell Ozuna is always interacting with a lot of the Latin guys. They're cutting up, they're having fun, whether it's Ozzy Albies, Ronald Acuna Jr., Orlando Arcia, like he's keeping the whole group loose. And we've had players talk before about him being able to come over and give them a tip, give them a pep talk, whatever, and they turn things around. Michael Harris talked about, I think it was in 23, he was scuffling a little bit when he came back from the back, and they were playing the Mets. And Ozuna came over and gave him a little pep talk in the tunnel. And from there, he just went nuclear. I say leader for the Latin players, but a leader in general is Marcell Ozuna. Ozzy Albies, I mentioned, the longest tenured Brave at this point. By virtue of that, you end up taking on a leadership role, even though Ozzy's one of the, I'm going to say he's one of the more quieter leaders. And that's a similar situation you have with Austin Riley and Matt Olson. They're also those quiet leaders, right? It's a lot of leading by example, which has been an Atlanta thing, but like leading by example, talking to guys privately versus the big raw pep talks in the locker room, things like that. And then I do think that you're going to see the emergence of Michael Harris II as a leader, as a vocal leader. I still feel like that side of the ball is missing that verbal, vocal leader in the similar respect of how you have Spencer Strider on the pitching side. Remember all those quotes from spring training where Spencer's talking about our goal is to win the World Series, we're focused on that, et cetera, all that stuff. I feel like Michael Harris has the ability to evolve into that on the position player side. But when it comes to the pitching staff, Spencer Strider is a vocal leader. Chris Sale is a veteran leader. Some of that is led by example. He's literally been the best. He was the best pitcher for the Braves last year. Some of that is just his veteran. Like, he's been around this game for so long. He's done so many different things. He's won championships. He can point to specific things, whether it's overcoming injury, whether it's how to dominate and still be focused on the day-to-day and not get into your head about all the different aspects of being a pro. He can talk about from learned and lived experiences. I do wonder about that leader in the bullpen. Who is going to be that bullpen leader? Is it Raisel Iglesias? He's a little bit of a quieter guy. Like, who is going to be the bullpen's vocal leader? And I know that works differently, like inside the group versus outwardly where we see it. But I do wonder about who's going to be that bullpen leader. Is it Raisel? Is it somebody else? We don't quite know. But in just a second, I want to talk about, yes, you have those leaders. It would have been nice to keep some of those other guys. In what situation should you be willing to make a bad deal to keep someone? We'll discuss that next, right here on Braves Today. Welcome back to Braves Today. Lindsay Crosby talking about losing leadership on a year-by-year basis, and at what point do you be willing to make a bad deal to keep to either add to your roster or keep one of those veteran leaders. And I think that's the number one thing right there, is retaining your absolute studs. When I go through that list of guys that left, right? Fried, Morton, d'Arnaud, Swanson, Freeman, etc. I think probably the only one that I would have been comfortable making a deal that was too long and had dead money on the back is Freddie Freeman. And part of that is because his stuff should age well, right? He looks as good as he's looked at age 35. Did have a little bit of injury issues last year, missed some time with a family issue, but looked as good as he's looked at his age 35 year. So I would have been willing to do a bad deal on Freddie Freeman. And I still don't think you can hold Freddie Freeman leaving over this front office and over AA. And we'll have a whole show at some point in time about why people are so pissed at AA. Honestly, there's a whole conversation to have about this. There was a tweet over the weekend that he's the worst thing to ever happen to the Atlanta Braves. And I'm like, we got to pump the brakes on this. This is absurd. So y'all calm down a little bit. We're bringing on an expert on Friday, by the way, an outside expert to talk about how good this Braves team is and to tell y'all to chill out a little bit. Not listeners of this show, the crazy Braves fans. Yeah, like Dansby Swanson, I loved Dansby. I think AA was right to cap him at that $22 million. I don't know if I think he's been like $28 million with the Cubs. I don't necessarily think that extra $6 million would have been worth the downside on the back end. Freddie Freeman's a guy I would have capped. And I don't really know what the criteria here is for retain your studs. That's what I wrote in the rundown, is retain your studs. But I think in the case of Freddie Freeman, he's someone who looks like he's going to be a Hall of Famer. At the time of free agency, Freddie Freeman looked like he was potentially or on track to be a Hall of Fame first baseman who was already with your team. I think that is a situation where it is easy to say, yes, we will take extra dead money on the back end to keep that guy in the organization. Now, all things being equal, the deferred money, the state taxes, the Braves deal and the Dodgers deal were roughly equivalent, and he chose to leave, and that's on him, right? But Freddie Freeman's a guy that I would have tried to keep. I don't think I would have been willing to accept all of that potential dead money to keep a Dansby Swanson, to keep a Max Fried, and I think the delineation there has to be tenure, right? Freddie Freeman had been here for, a decade when he hit free agency? And Hall of Fame trajectory. I love Max Fried. I don't think as of now Max Fried's on track to be a Hall of Famer. I love Dansby Swanson. I bought All Things Loyal merch. That website doesn't exist anymore. But I don't think Dansby Swanson's on track to be a Hall of Famer. I do think Freddie Freeman is. That would have been a situation where I would have been willing to take dead money to keep your Hall of Fame trajectory stud. And again, that's not Atlanta's fault. That's Freddie Freeman and his agent are the ones who ultimately ended up sending Freddie somewhere else. Chipper Jones warned him, don't get to free agency. Get it handled before you get to free agency. And you know how AA works. He gives you his best possible offer. He's not going to change it. He's not going to increase it. This is the absolute best I can do. That's how AA works. That's what you'd want when you buy a car, right? You want it to work like that. I think situation number 2, where you need to be willing to take some dead money on the back end, is if you can find that absolute final missing piece. And it's hard to know who that guy is before you bring him in, right? Like, I don't know if there's anybody in free agency this year who would have been that final missing piece. Let's say you had a full 5-man rotation of playoff caliber starters. Let's say you had a stud in left field all figured out. Would it have been worth breaking that $22 million threshold and having dead money on the back end to get a Willy Adames? A lot of people listening to this podcast are going to say yes. And the hard part is identifying that player is in fact going to be the missing piece ahead of time. But that is a situation. If you can say this player absolutely fixes our biggest flaw and does it at a well above average level, like at elite level, it's worth taking on dead money to get that guy. Now, the issue you have in free agency is it's typically not just money, right? Willy Adames had a qualifying offer. The Braves would have lost 2 draft picks to sign Willy Adames. And I think that's the biggest issue there was you would have lost your 2nd and 5th highest selections in the draft and $1 million from your international bonus pool. And AA's gone on the record as saying losing draft picks is a whole other situation they don't want to go into. They don't want to sign a qualifying offer player because they don't want to lose draft picks to do it. And again, because you paid competitive balance tax, you would have lost 2 draft picks. If you were not paying the CBT, you would have lost your second highest selection and $500,000 from the international bonus pool. And we've already seen reports Atlanta has a lot of top tier players they're looking at signing. We'll talk about that in a coming up show. A lot of players they're looking at signing in the upcoming J15 class. But losing a second and fifth rounder and $1 million from that pool is a significant penalty. Side note on this, if the Braves are legitimately resetting the CBT, that does minimize the penalties next offseason if they want to go out and sign Bo Bichette to a long-term deal. I have no inside information on this. I don't know whether or not Atlanta's going to want to get into free agency and sign a shortstop. I will point out that Alex Anthopoulos left Toronto the year before Bo Bichette was drafted. AA worked through 2015. I believe it was, It was November 2015 when he left. They drafted Bo Bichette in 2016. So he didn't overlap with Bo Bichette. This is not any sort of inside info here. But we know you'll have an inflection point next offseason on Orlando Arcia. Club option, $2 million. Obviously, they're going to pick that up because he's a useful backup if nothing else. But I can see a world where this is the final chance for Orlando Arcia to prove that he can be an MLB caliber shortstop offensively. And this is the final opportunity for Nacho Alvarez to show that he can stick defensively at shortstop. And if neither one of those things happens, maybe next offseason is when they go on and they go into free agency, pay less penalties to get Bo Bichette to be their shortstop. He could always kick over to second base once Ozzie Albies is done. We've talked about, does Ozzie end up moving to DH or something in the future, whatever. And I think that's the third part of that for me. That's the third criteria here. I touched on a little bit with Freddie about him aging, but the third thing why you would be willing to take on dead money in a deal on the back end is when you can mitigate the downside. There are a couple positions on the field where it is very easy to see how, as a player starts to decline, you can mitigate some of their declining skill set by moving them to less demanding defensive positions. Okay? Center fielders obviously can kick out to left or right field. Third baseman can move to first base. Shortstops can move to second base. Even catchers could move to first base, right? Austin Riley is signed for 1 million years, right? He's only 28 years old. He signed a 10-year deal, right? So he is signed through 2032, through his age 35 season, with a club option for his age 36 season. Do we still think he'll be at third base at age 35 or 36? Possibly not. But if he can't hack it defensively at age 35 or whatever, you can move him to first. And so a lot of Atlanta's deals have been players who are young, who are going to be in their primes in the deal. Michael Harris, right? Going into this season, Michael Harris is 24 years old, right? So yeah, you have club options through 2032, but he'll be in his low 30s when the deal runs out. Ronald Acuna Jr.'s 27 years old. He signed through 2028 when you count the club options. But the guys who are signed longer into their 30s, you can see how you can mitigate the downside because you have the ability to move them from, in this case, to move Austin Riley from third base to first base. I promise I did not plan this, but I keep coming back now. Bo Bichette can play shortstop for you. And then if you have if you start to worry about his defensive skills, he'll be 27 before before the 25 season starts. His birthday's in March. So he'll be 28 if you were to sign him next offseason. He would play his age 28 season in 26. Let's say you sign him to a 7-year deal, because that is what it feels like a lot of these deals to get these shortstops take, 7 or longer. Look at what Xander Bogaerts signed. Look at what Trey Turner signed. Look at what Dansby signed. Like, a lot of these deals are long-term deals like that. You can absolutely see, okay, Ozzie Albies only has a couple years left. We could always, if Bo can stick it short, great. Brandon Crawford played it up into his mid-30s. If he can't stick it short, think about like Brandon Phillips, how Brandon Phillips had to move off of short. He can play second base. Ozzie can be the DH. Ozzie may have walked by then. We don't know. The 3 situations I think I'm okay to take on dead money for a player is, 1, to retain your studs, your Hall of Fame trajectory guys, right? And I think you're going to have that conversation in a couple years with Ronald Acuna Jr. If he's able to stay healthy, there's going to be conversation about, is he on a Hall of Fame trajectory or not? Do you sign another deal with Ronald Acuna Jr. and take on dead money to get him, or to keep him? Situation number 2, finding that final missing piece, right? Like right now you have a couple holes, okay? We talked about you need another playoff caliber starter, right? You need to figure out left field. Does Jared Kelenic break out finally? Do you sign somebody else? Where do you find that guy? And shortstop is a weakness. But if you had all of those holes filled but one, yeah, be willing to take on some dead money to go fill that final hole and give you one of the best rosters in baseball. Because the only team right now without any holes is the Los Angeles Dodgers. And even there, I'd argue they don't have any sort of like established dominant closers in their bullpen. They have a lot of dudes who could be dominant closers, but they don't actually have a dominant closer in the bullpen. Outside of that, no other roster in baseball is stacked at every position. Everybody has weaknesses, right? The Phillies are in a situation where they're going to be playing Brandon Marsh and Johan Rojas in center field. That's not ideal. The Mets rotation is still very underwhelming, and they're banking on last year's magic with everybody they signed to happen again, right? The Brewers, they don't have established starting pitching. I picked them because they won the division. I don't know why I went into the Brewers automatically, but just the Yankees. They got questions at either second or third base, whoever ends up being the non-Jazz Chisholm position. They got questions there. They've got questions at left field. And that's assuming Jason Dominguez makes it work in center. Everybody has questions on their roster, with maybe the exception of the Dodgers. But the Braves still have one of the best rosters in baseball. And it's important for us to remember that. But also acknowledge, yeah, there's times when maybe taking on a bad deal would be worth it. I want to know what you think. Let me know your thoughts on, when is it worth it to take on a bad deal, dead money at the end, to get a guy to add in a win now window? Who would that player be? Give me one from this offseason or next offseason if you want, to let me know who that guy should be. I'm on Twitter at Crosby Baseball. Show's on Twitter at Braves_today. Contact at bravestoday.com. You can leave it in the YouTube comments down below. Tons of ways to get them to us. Until next time, this has been Braves Today.